the podcast that covers everything related to SAP implementations. This podcast is not affiliated with SAP and covers the realistic truth behind S/4HANA, Ariba, and SuccessFactors ERP implementation success. Whether you're new to the world of SAP, an existing ECC, or R3 customer, a multinational team, or a mid-sized organization, this podcast is for you. Now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
Welcome to episode 1 of Journey to S/4HANA. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys, including those that are going through S/4HANA implementations. Joining me today is my co-host, Darian Fiakuski. Darian, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, I'm super excited to start this with you.
Absolutely. Got a lot to cover today. We're going to have a great guest here in just a moment. We're going to bring David Essex onto the show, who's a writer or journalist for Tech Target. And he's going to be on the show talking about trends in the S/4HANA space, specifically what's happening within the world of SAP, but also what's going on with their customers too. So we're going to talk about how customers are adjusting to the 2027 deadline to get off legacy SAP systems. We're going to talk about how SAP is competing against some of its competitors and peers in the space. And we'll also talk about some recent user group surveys that have come out of ASUG and some of the SAP user groups. So we're going to talk about what the data tells us as it relates to SAP customers and just really the state of the union of SAP customers as it stands right now. Before we get to that, though, just a couple of quick logistical things. This podcast is a weekly podcast that you can learn more about and find current and past episodes and future episodes at the website journey2s4hana.com. There's no special syllables in there or no special characters. Just go to journey2s4hana.com and you can keep up to date with all the recent podcasts, the episodes that we put out on all the different platforms that we publish. Secondly, this podcast is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, which is the company that I work for. And the podcast is produced by Major Tom Productions. And I've included a link below or an email address below. If you're interested in advertising on this podcast, you can reach out to Mindy at Major Tom Productions. I've included her contact information in the description field below, wherever you might be listening here today. So before we bring our guest on, Darian, a couple things we wanted to cover. We want to cover some social media questions about S/4HANA that we've recently received. And we also want to cover an article that you've recently uncovered that we're going to discuss. But let's talk about some of the questions from social media to start.
Yeah, absolutely. Some really good questions today. So the first being, how does SAP MDG play a role in data migration to minimize data errors at the time of go live?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's master data governance is what MDG stands for. And that's one of those work streams within S/4HANA implementations that oftentimes gets overlooked. So a lot of times project teams and organizations put off master data and master data governance until later. So that's one thing is we have to recognize how important it is. And, MDG is not just cleaning up data and migrating data from your legacy system to S/4HANA. It's also defining the governance around how are we going to preserve that data and make sure that we don't corrupt the data, once we're live in S/4HANA. So that's the second piece. And then, to get there, though, to get from the point where we've actually cleansed the data, we've put some master data governance processes in place. We also have to make sure that we test the data, before we go live. So there's that sort of interim step there. And that's where MDG can help, ensure that we've got sort of a data load of real data that we can test and make sure that we've worked through any data related issues as well as system related issues that we might only uncover if we're going through the data migration process. So that's a big part of how I see MDG fitting into the overall successful go live of S/4HANA.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes sense. So the second social question that we got was, what are the current challenges companies face or should anticipate when considering a transition from what they are currently using for a software to SAP RISE?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we are actually going to talk about SAP RISE here later today with David when he comes on the show here in just a moment. We're going to talk about SAP RISE and what it means to the market, but in general, I think it's important to recognize that RISE is a great initiative. It's a bold attempt by SAP to make S/4HANA more palatable to more legacy customers that might be using ECC or R3 or one of the other legacy SAP products. Or maybe they've implemented S/4HANA, but they're either on-prem or on a private cloud. And SAP is trying to get them to the public cloud. So the thing with Rise, though, that you have to be aware of is that it is a push to get more customers onto the S/4HANA public cloud, which in and of itself is not a bad thing. But for a lot of organizations, that's a huge jump. And that's why a lot of organizations have bypassed or deferred the decision to go to the public cloud. And instead, they've taken a sort of interim step to go on-prem with S/4HANA, or in some cases, private cloud, which is actually most of our clients end up going private cloud, at least at this moment in time. So SAP is attempting to kind of push people more into that public cloud, which is, ultimately where they would like to see their customers go. But I think the key thing to recognize is that you have to look at the competencies and capabilities that you're getting in the cloud, in the public cloud version of S/4HANA, and sort of the gap analysis between what you have today. Because for a lot of organizations, especially if you're using like R3, which is the older version of their legacy software, that's a huge jump to go from R3 to SAP public cloud, especially if you're in a highly customized environment. If you customized and did a bunch of ABAP programming as part of your ECC or R3 implementation, it's going to be really hard to get that same capability in public cloud, because now public cloud is going to be less flexible and you're not going to have as much of a customization option. And you're certainly not going to have that option to easily bring that customization from your old system over to public cloud. So I think the biggest thing is really just recognizing where the gaps, where the impacts and the change impacts to the organization, and how is that going to affect your overall implementation timeline and budget. And the reason so many of these implementations end up running over and cost more than expected, take more time than expected, is because organizations don't have a good understanding of that dynamic, which is, what's the magnitude of change? How big of a change is this? How painful is this going to be for us operationally and organizationally?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are some great answers to our pressing social questions today on SAPs.
Great. So what's the article you have in store for us?
Yeah, so today's article discusses the SAP customers' disconnect with the company's decision to limit future innovations to subscribers of its Rise with SAP offering. Many customers, particularly those who are using older SAP software or on-premise S/4HANA, feel excluded and question the fairness of this approach. With low adoption rates of the cloud versions of S/4HANA, concerns arise for SAP and contract renegotiations. Customers demand better support and access to innovations, prompting calls for SAP to reconsider its overall strategy and ensure inclusivity for all of their current customers. What implications do you think low adoption rates of cloud versions of S/4HANA have for SAP in terms of customer satisfaction and contract negotiations?
Well, for customer satisfaction, I think it's going to be a challenge for SAP. I think they're burning a lot of goodwill and credibility in the market right now, and trust, quite candidly, because they're trying so hard to push legacy SAP customers onto S/4HANA now. And for some organizations, it just doesn't make sense. Maybe they don't have the budget. Maybe they just went live with ECC not too long ago, and they don't have the tolerance or the patience for another big digital transformation or SAP implementation. But whatever the case is, I think it's sort of violated a certain amount of trust and credibility in the market. So now with this addition of Rise, it's meant to have there's good intentions behind it. It's meant to bring as many customers over to the cloud as possible. And ultimately, once they get all their customers over to the cloud, now they can start spending all of their R&D and all their efforts on one product, instead of now, as it is now, trying to maintain multiple products, which is always a challenge for software vendors as the technology changes and becomes more obsolete. So I do think that, I see why customers are irritated or frustrated by that, knowing that they're not going to get the same levels of R&D and innovation unless they go with Rise and take the Rise path. But I think it's maybe more of an ethical question in addition to the business and financial decision that SAP has to make. There's also the ethics of it is, do they have a right to tell a customer you're just not going to be able to take advantage in our new innovation because you're not on the right version? I suppose it's always been that way in the ERP space, even outside of SAP's ecosystem. So I guess I'm a bit torn on it, or I'm on the fence on whether or not it's ethical or unethical. But I think it's just a reality, whether you like it or not. I think it's just the reality that customers have to deal with, and just be aware of that. If you don't go to the cloud version, you're probably just kicking the can down the road, and you're just going to have to figure out a way to get to the cloud quickly if you do stay on-prem, or if you deploy S/4HANA, but it's on-prem, you're just kicking the can down the road, and you're eventually going to have to go to the cloud.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And you touched on the trust that they maybe lost with some of their customers. So, in your opinion, what steps could they maybe take to regain some of that trust with the customers that maybe feel left behind by this strategy they're implementing?
So to restore the trust, I'd say one thing they can do is first of all consolidate. They can consolidate all their R&D and efforts into S/4HANA, which they are doing. But I think to differentiate right now between S/4HANA on-prem and S/4HANA private cloud, S/4HANA public cloud, I think, and certainly RISE customers versus non-RISE customers, not considering the dollars and cents and the financial implications, which I know SAP does have to worry about that. They have to create a viable company or grow a viable company. So it's probably easier said than done, but I wouldn't differentiate at this point, given the amount of trust that they've lost or the credibility they've lost in the market. I wouldn't do that yet. Maybe I pull resources away from R3 and ECC enhancements innovation, but I would probably at this point, at least as an interim step, invest in the 3 different versions of S/4HANA rather than saying you're only going to get certain capabilities if you go to the cloud. I think that they've used up their stiff arm goodwill, hammer approach to trying to force clients into the cloud. I think they need to, if I were them, I'd chill out a little bit, throttle back that effort a little bit and say, we want you on S/4HANA first, and then start to push more people to the cloud once you get a bigger share of legacy customers on S/4HANA. Because last I saw, it's only about 1/3 of legacy SAP customers have even started the migration or finished the migration to S/4HANA. So you still have 2/3 of the market that hasn't done anything with S/4HANA. So if your real goal and end game is to get everyone to S/4HANA, get that interim step first where you have a majority of people at least on S/4HANA, then you can start thinking about, okay, now how do we get more of them to the cloud? That would be my suggestion. But of course, there's financial implications to that in R&D budgets that I'm not privy to that only SAP can answer. So that'd be my outside in looking perspective there.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a little intense right now with the only on cloud, but if they take maybe a step back, that would help maybe gain some of that trust back. But I'm excited to hear from our guest today, so I will hand it over to you, Eric.
Yeah, we've got a great guest who's actually going to dive into some of the stuff we're just talking about. I'm going to ask him some questions related to what you just brought up, Jerry. And we're going to talk to David Essex from TechTarget. He's a writer, a journalist. He's been in the space for a long time. He's covered SAP for a long time, as well as enterprise technologies in general for a long time. But we're going to talk about SAP trends in the market, how customers are adjusting to the 27 deadline, some of the recent data from recent user group surveys. So we're going to cover a lot of different stuff related to trends and sort of what's going on behind the scenes at SAP and within the SAP ecosystem. So you're not going to want to miss that. So we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll bring David onto the show. So we'll take a quick break. We'll be back with more Journey to S/4HANA podcast. If you're going through an S/4HANA implementation, you're looking for best practices and tips on how to make your project more successful, I encourage you to check out 2 resources that I made available to our listeners here on this podcast. First is our guide to a successful S/4HANA implementation. It's a paper that I wrote based on all of our clients that have implemented S/4HANA, some of the lessons we've learned, some of the best practices that we typically advise our clients to follow when going through their S/4HANA implementation. So be sure to check that out. You can find that in the links below in this podcast. You can also scan the QR code right in front of you. The second thing you might want to check out is an online course that I've created. It's a course that's called the Deep Dive into SAP S/4HANA Implementations. And in that 2.5-hour course, I get into all the basics of what SAP S/4HANA is, what it takes to make the project more successful, how to manage change, how to handle the project planning, how to manage your system integrator, as well as some case studies from some of our clients and some of the lessons learned from some of our clients. So check out that training as well. So there's 2 things you could check out here, both in the links below. One is the guide to S/4HANA implementations. The other is my S/4HANA training course. So be sure to check it out. And our goal here is to help you be more successful in your transformation. So hope you found this information useful, and we'll continue on with the show.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
Welcome back to episode number 1 of Journey to S4HANA. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting, and Third Stage Consulting is an independent consulting firm that helps clients through their S4HANA implementations as well as other digital transformations. If you'd like to learn more about us, be sure to check out our website at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also go to the links below in the description field for this episode and find some additional SAP resources that we've included for you, including our guide to successful S4HANA implementation. So be sure to check that out in the links below. You can find new and past episodes of the show, although this is episode 1, so there are no past episodes. But going forward, you'll be able to see past episodes at journey2s4hana.com. So be sure to check that out. The show is produced by Major Tom Productions. So if you'd like to advertise or feature your brand, get your product or service out to a tech buying community globally, reach out to us. You can reach out to Mindy at Major Tom Productions. I've included her contact information in the description field below. So all that being said, I'm excited for our guest today, who's David Essex, someone I've known for a long time. He's been in the space for a long time. He's covered SAP and now S4HANA for a long time. And I wanted to bring him onto the show in this first episode to really set the context or set the stage for what's going on in the S4HANA ecosystem, what's going on behind closed doors at SAP, and more importantly, what are customers doing? How are they reacting to S4HANA, the migration from ECC and R3 to S4HANA, Grow and Rise? We're going to talk about what is Grow, what is Rise, how is this affecting customers? And also we want to get into some user group surveys as well. So a lot to cover here with David. So with all that being said, David, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Eric.
Yeah, it's exciting. And you've got a unique perspective of the S4HANA and just the SAP ecosystem in general, having covered it now for TechTarget and just in general for over 10 years now, right? You've been covering this space?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'm really curious to get your feedback on sort of the state of the S4HANA industry right now. But just to start, what are some of the biggest trends you're seeing in the S4HANA space in your coverage of the ecosystem there?
Well, I think probably the big picture statement is to say that the S4HANA adoption process is going a lot slower than SAP surely wanted it to when they introduced S4HANA. It's actually been 9 years ago, February 2015. I think I did the math right. So
I did not realize that.
Yeah,
it's already been 9 years. It doesn't feel like that long ago.
Time has flown. So, and I saw a quote by Liz Herbert of Forrester, who was pointing out similar sort of take on it, that this is behind schedule for SAP. And anecdotally, I've noticed that a lot of the case studies we hear about are for the on-premises S4HANA. So sometimes, SAP would kind of wants folks to believe that a lot of the implementations are for S4HANA Cloud. And it turns out, especially in the early years, it was really the on-premises version, which is more feature-rich. The cloud version has been gradually catching up in terms of feature richness and functionality. But a lot of the companies really needed to start with on-premises. And so the other thing that happens is a lot of these migrations, and we saw this again anecdotally and to some degree statistically a few years ago, were to S4HANA Finance. So that's a partial move where they're moving just the finance component, the accounting component of S4HANA. They're moving it maybe to on-premises S4HANA, but they're more likely to go to the cloud for that, because then you can have this more generic process, which accounting typically is for companies. You can have that be more global because it's on the web, but then they were still leaving most of their on-premises SAP systems on-premises. They weren't really making the full move. So in fairness, I should point out, I was checking the earnings transcript recently. S4HANA Cloud revenue, according to SAP, it has reached 1/10 of total revenue. So they were talking about it being well over 3 billion euros. And that's actually a pretty good number, I would say, for a company with so many products and such a long history. And assuming that they're not
just for the cloud, are you talking about just for the cloud?
Cloud, I was really kind of surprised in that their cloud number that they give for all the cloud products is the vast majority now of their revenue, which I always think is suspect, because I know that Oracle has done this over the years too. They have a very loosey-goosey definition of how they count things as cloud. But they broke out S4HANA Cloud, and it was a pretty impressive number just last month in their quarterly earnings call. So
Wow.
yeah, so I guess the the other kind of big takeaway or the major statement maybe to make about where SAP is right now is that it's a critical juncture because with the 2027 deadline coming up for requiring people essentially to move off of the on-premises ECC Business Suite to S/4HANA and S/4HANA Cloud. I think they're at a real juncture, that a real risk of losing business to the competition because if you're having to revisit and kind of open it up to making a pretty big leap to S/4HANA Cloud, especially the multi-tenant SaaS version that can tend to be way different and a lot simpler than what they're used to, then why not look at all of them? Why not look at Workday and Acumatica and the Oracle Fusion Cloud ERP products? So I think it is a big juncture. It's an area of opportunity, but also great risk for SAP.
Yeah, and it's you bring up a great point, a few great points, which is one of which is that it's not a simple lift and shift. Going from ECC or even worse if you're going from R3 to S4 HANA. That's a huge jump, even more so for R3. How First of all, have you heard this metric? I believe I read a metric recently. It was either from Gartner or maybe McKinsey or Forrester, one of the big analyst or consulting firms. I think it was Gartner. They said that roughly only 1/3 of ECC customers have either started or begun the migration to S/4HANA. Have you seen any metrics like that? Or does that ring a bell with you?
It's in the ballpark. They vary quite a bit, but I have seen, ASUG, the America's SAP User Group, they have done some surveys, and I think the last one was around the middle of last year, and they were showing big percentages of user groups, of users, that is, customers, intending to go to S/4HANA, saying that they plan to, something like 86%, and roughly half of those have actually done it. So those numbers are pretty good. On the other hand, I did see a brief from Gartner, which was estimating just recently that 70% of SAP customers still rely on ECC and they have yet to upgrade to S/4HANA. And so I think we're seeing numbers all over the place. I think the trend is in the right direction for SAP, but still, as I said earlier, not anywhere near what they would have wanted.
Right. Well, especially with this 2027 deadline to get their ECC customers off of ECC to S/4HANA. Why do you think that is? If SAP has set this deadline of 2027 where they're going to stop support and new R&D and stuff like that for ECC, and you've only got a subset of ECC customers that are actually beginning that migration, time's ticking. Why do you think that is, that more customers aren't moving over sooner? And in general, how do you think they're adjusting or reacting to that 2027 deadline?
Well, the reasons I think it is, and I've been hearing this from a lot of sources, these reasons from a lot of sources. One is that many of them truly are not so sure that the cloud version, maybe even the on-premises S/4HANA, which is still the more feature-rich one, but especially the multi-tenant SaaS version, really does enough of what they need. So they're reluctant. They have customizations. They don't want to have to give up their customizations, which is they know they have to do. They've been told they mostly have to do if they go to the multi-tenant SaaS version of S/4HANA. There's that, and I think there's a fair amount of confusion about some of the programs like Rise with SAP and Grow with SAP that are meant to ease the migration. People are gradually learning about them and understanding them, but up to a year or two ago, and especially when Rise first came out several years ago now, there was a lot of confusion among the user groups about what exactly it is and what it's going to do for them.
Right. Yeah, and I'd love to hear from the audience listening now. Just if you don't mind, just drop in the chat. Have you started your migration off of ECC? Are you moving to S/4HANA? Are you not sure what to do? I'd sort of just love to see the comments here from the audience on whichever platform you're listening or watching here. Be curious to get your feedback. You mentioned another thing you mentioned too is that you made a really good point a moment ago that if you're an organization that is moving from R3 or ECC or any other legacy SAP product to S4HANA, you might as well consider your other options because it is a complete re-implementation. Are you seeing any trends in that regard as far as in your coverage of the SAP space? Are you seeing more customers that are either frustrated with the mandate with the 2027 deadline, or they're just not sure if S4HANA is a good fit, so they're therefore looking for other alternatives, maybe more so than they might have in the past when they were evaluating an SAP upgrade?
I'm definitely seeing some anecdotal evidence of that. Just, some of the users I've talked to, and this is over several years, and also my colleague Jim O'Donnell, who's the news writer for our SAP site, he talks to quite a few folks. It's clear that it is happening, but I don't have really good evidence or data on that. And none of the analyst firms, at least the stuff they offer for free, seem to be giving out that information. But it kind of stands to reason that companies would be doing that, especially since, as SAP itself has stated, and I think the consulting firms that help people with this migration have stated, if you're going to S4HANA Cloud, again, I always emphasize, I mean the multi-tenant SaaS version, not the private cloud one that is
Right.
not really what we think of as more pure cloud. It's going to be a greenfield implementation. And I always have to remind myself, that's not the same thing as net new. That greenfield can be for a company that already has SAP products. That term is often used. So they have to kind of start fresh, but then they have to think about their data migration, what they're going to drop. It's a more of a, it's certainly not starting new, and that's part of the problem. But so, by mentioning the greenfield, even if they're going to make them stay with S4HANA, they're having to go greenfield. So then I'm back to more of the logic of why they should be looking at, and probably are looking at, other vendors. Because if you're going to have to do that, then why stick with SAP?
Yeah. Makes total sense. What about on the other side? I know you cover more than just SAP. You sort of look at the broader purview of digital transformation and enterprise technology in general. But are you seeing any signs or trends of non-SAP customers that are looking at S4HANA and looking to make that migration, or is it primarily legacy SAP customers you see making that jump to S4HANA?
Oh, so you're wondering whether some people are choosing S4HANA?
Yeah, if they're on, like, say, Oracle Fusion, or maybe they're on Oracle EBS or an older version of Microsoft Dynamics, or a non-SAP product, making that jump from non-SAP to SAP S4HANA. Are you seeing any trends up or down in that segment of the market?
I'm seeing more anecdotal. I wish I could give numbers, and I don't. It doesn't appear that the user groups anyway have really studied it. And if the Gartners and Forresters and IDCs of the world are doing it, they're not making that information freely available, if you know what I mean by freely. So
right.
There's lots of case studies, though. SAP, I can't think of all the names. I know that one is Jabil, the big contract manufacturer. They had a bunch of different systems and went to S4HANA. So you have anecdotal evidence, you have individual case studies, and there's definitely evidence of companies that weren't on SAP before doing that. And it seems like it's usually they're doing it that's when they're going to multi-tenant SaaS, S4HANA Cloud. So they're not going to the more complex. They're making a move in the direction of consolidation on the cloud. And that's how they're getting off of some of their other on-premises systems. So I definitely see wins that SAP is getting. And yet, on the other hand, again, anecdotally, Larry Ellison, especially the CTO of Oracle, every earnings call, he always wants to brag about how they've won business over to Oracle Fusion Cloud ERP from SAP. So it's hard to tell, but it's pretty clear to me that some people who haven't really been SAP customers before are trying out S4HANA Cloud, especially with Grow with SAP, which does target more the mid-market. So, and I think maybe some smaller companies can use that too.
Yeah. When I come back to that, Grow and Rise, initiatives here in a moment, because I want to dig into that with you. But speaking of Larry Ellison, and just to build on what you just said, I've seen anecdotal evidence as well, or anecdotal stories of companies that have gone from SAP to another product. I mean, one that I just read about recently, and by the way, in our client base, I don't know of any customers that we're currently helping implement S/4HANA that weren't already on an old version of SAP. So, that's a small sample, relatively small sample. We don't have tens of thousands of clients, but, of the dozen or so SAP implementations we're supporting right now worldwide, I believe every one of them I know is going from legacy SAP to S/4HANA. But, I have seen actual examples outside of our client base. One that I read about that maybe you read about too recently was the Birmingham City Council in Europe. It's the largest local government entity in Europe, and they went from SAP to Oracle Fusion, and Larry Ellison, called it out as a big win for them, which it was. But they had a complete disaster on their hands, and there's a bunch of news that's come out recently about that implementation. So not to say you're going to fail if you go from legacy SAP to non-SAP, but that's even a bigger jump, I would argue. Even though S/4HANA is a completely new product, there's at least some familiarity of the, for better or for worse, that SAP look and feel. People that know SAP ECC generally are going to pick up on S/4HANA faster than trying to pick up on Oracle Fusion or Microsoft Dynamics or whatever the system may be. But that's a broad generalization, of course. How do you see S/4HANA competing against Oracle and Microsoft and Workday, some of these other big ERP and enterprise tech vendors? How are they holding up? How do you see them competing right now in the market in general?
If you asked me that a couple of years ago, I would have said, having gone to a lot of the Oracle conferences, the main conference, Cloud World, formerly Open World, I would have said that the Oracle Fusion suite, which includes a human capital management module, which SAP has to do by having SuccessFactors, which they own, but it's somewhat separate product. I would have said that Oracle was clearly ahead, and I have said that in some of the things I've written. But lately, it does seem like with all the things that SAP has added to S/4HANA, and this goes back 3 or 4 years roughly when they started, they got stronger with adding logistics and procurement, a supply chain whole module, I guess. It seems like they've reached rough parity. And I was looking at a Gartner Magic Quadrant for the product-centric products. So that's ones where you got to have a manufacturing component. It's not the service-centric piece. And they were saying roughly the same thing, that S/4HANA has gotten quite strong in its capabilities. So, and this is something I wanted to ask you, Eric, because as you pointed out for many years, Microsoft is almost always on the short list for a lot of companies when they're narrowing it down and making their decision. And yet, to me, maybe I'm being a selfish member of the press, they don't blare their horn the way SAP and Oracle do about all the wonderful things they're doing with Dynamics AX. I guess it's usually Dynamics 365 now. They don't tend to brag as much about the things that they're doing with their ERP product, and yet they still have really good market share and are on these short lists. So I'm wondering, are they staying competitive with Oracle and SAP and maybe even Infor, or are they kind of lagging in terms of development and what they're doing with Dynamics?
That's a great question. I mean, if I had to hypothesize on why that is, why they're not tooting their own horn or pounding their chest whenever they have these big wins, like Larry Ellison's the exact opposite of that. He will make sure that everyone knows when the Oracle gets a big win.
Yeah.
But I think the difference with Microsoft that maybe works against them or doesn't allow them to have that same bravado is that you have they're very decentralized in how they sell their software, so it's all through VARs and resellers, whereas SAP and Oracle are getting involved, in their direct sales force. I think Microsoft's doing a bit more direct sales to larger enterprises now than they did, but still most of their revenue, I believe, is coming through the reseller network. So, it's in that decentralization. It's not as well known internally at Microsoft if they win a big deal. I don't know. I'm speculating, but That would be my guess.
You're
But
confirming my speculation. That's what I wondered, if it was the sales channels are different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do think they're, at least with our client base, they are competing well. I mean, we do have more S4HANA customers for sure that are either already on S4HANA and just looking for help optimizing or recovering a failed S4HANA implementation, or clients that are asking us to help with the implementation. I think S4HANA overshadows D365 in our client base, but that's because a lot of our clients are larger, more complex, and they just need or want something like an S4HANA. D365, I think they compete a bit better, I'd say, in the mid-market. And again, we'll come back to this whole SAP Grow thing here in a minute and follow up on this point. But mid-market, I'd say D365 is probably stronger. And in our mid-market client base, we have more D365 clients. So I think it just depends on what the needs are. Certainly organizations that value tons of flexibility and open architecture and integration are probably going to gravitate toward Microsoft, especially if they're already a Microsoft shop with SharePoint and Microsoft Office 365 and all the other products. So I think they're competing well. I don't want to say it's better or worse than S4HANA, but they're competing well depending on the market we're looking at. We're here with David Essex talking about some of the trends in the S4HANA ecosystem. We've got a lot more to cover, but first we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Journey to S4HANA. Hi, this is Eric Kimberling, and I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting Group. And I wanted to take a moment and tell you a little bit about Third Stage and what we do and how we help clients through their S4HANA implementations. First of all, Third Stage is technology agnostic, meaning that we're not affiliated with SAP. However, we do have quite a bit of experience helping clients through their S4HANA implementations. We help clients evaluate and do a fit gap analysis of S4HANA. We help them find the right system integrator. We help them negotiate their contracts with SAP and their system integrator. And then we also help with implementation planning and the implementation itself. So we help mobilize the right resources, make sure you've got a solid and realistic program to manage overall S4HANA implementation. And then we'll help with the program management, the change management, as well as process improvement. We also provide some technical services around data migration, as well as architecture and system integration as well. So those are just some of the things we can do to help you through your transformation. And if you're looking for more information about it, or if you'd like to learn more, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to just bounce around ideas or be an informal sounding board for you as you begin your transformation. You can reach me by contacting me via the contact information in the links below in the description field for this podcast. So look forward to chatting with you, and we'll see you soon. Welcome back to Journey to S4HANA, episode number 1. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. You can find episodes of this show at journeytosforhana.com. So be sure to check out episodes going forward. And also be sure to check out some of the SAP and S4HANA specific resources that we've included links to below. So be sure to check that out. So we're here with David Essex talking about some of the trends in the S4HANA ecosystem. Let's jump back into the conversation. Since we keep coming back or dancing around this whole mid-market discussion, SAP has this Grow initiative where they're really focusing on the mid-market and trying to make it easier and more tempting for the mid-market to adopt S4HANA. I presume, or I think, I get the impression that part of why they're doing this is because, moving mid-market, there's more companies in the mid-market, and SAP has traditionally struggled in the mid-market and smaller organizations as well. So I think they're trying to create an offering that appeals to the mid-market. How do you see SAP's Grow initiative? How do you see that sticking? Is that affecting customers? Is it working? What's your take on that?
My take is that, yes, that is what, they were pretty clear that that's what they were going for. I feel like it's a little early to say how well it's doing, although I did again see Christian Klein, the CEO of SAP, in the earnings call last month. He did claim that they have 700 customers signed up for it. I think that's probably less than with Rise, which is the more high-end equivalent of a program to get people to migrate. But the other thing about Grow, it does seem to be like the mid-market version of Rise with SAP, but it's clearly targeted at the net new customers. And so if I understand net new, that, that literally is like who we were talking about a few minutes ago, companies that haven't been SAP customers before. And so to me, another thing that, and this isn't exactly answering your question, I guess, but what that shows is that SAP knows that it has to compete in this sort of big wide ocean, or maybe even the wild west of these more nimble SaaS, multi-tenant SaaS ERP systems. They have to have an offering. And it's somewhat confused also because it's been pointed out, my colleague Jim O'Donnell, again, he got some commentary on this, and it stands to reason again that they have Business by Design, which has been their cloud ERP for SMBs. And so now there's some confusion, I would say, and people think that Business by Design is probably on its last legs, partly because it is appearing to be redundant now. So I have an idea what SAP is doing and trying to do and why they need to do that with grow with SAP, but I don't have a good sense yet of what kind of uptake there is for the program.
Yeah, part of me wonders if it's a kind of a slick marketing campaign. It sounds good in theory. How does it translate to reality? I guess that'll be the question that we've got to consider. And if you're listening here and you're going through an S/4HANA implementation, especially if you're part of that Grow program or the Rise program, love to hear your comments in the feedback or feedback in the comments field below. You also, one thing that you've covered, or when I say you, I mean Tech Target as an entire publication and media outlet. You guys have covered a lot with some of the ASUG user group surveys that SAP has conducted in recent years. What are some of the key findings that you guys are covering in some of those user surveys, and what's interesting that you're uncovering there?
Well, as far as actual surveys, we've seen in the ASUG, the Americas user group, and then the UK and Ireland user group, which is quite vocal, and also our Computer Weekly site in London covers that quite a bit. That is, both of them are showing surveys strong intention to adopt S/4HANA, and roughly half or a third of the total respondents actually doing it. And so another interesting number I saw, I don't have the percentages right in front of me, but this is, I think, a UK Ireland result again, that the reason people said they were going S/4HANA wasn't because of the wonderful features, which is what SAP often touts. It was because of the 2027 deadline. Yeah, so I guess maybe that's not surprising, but it doesn't seem ideal because it's the cudgel, it's and yeah, it doesn't seem like the best reason to make a move, and there's all sorts of problems with it, which we've kind of touched on a few times here. So the other thing, now this is not in a survey, but the real big noise we heard from user groups in the German-speaking user group, I think people call it informally DSAG. It's for the German-speaking countries, not just Germany, over in Europe. And
the Deutsch.
Yeah, the Deutsch, right? That's it. And they, when Christian Klein, the CEO, again, very explicitly made an announcement last year, mid to late last year, that SAP would no longer put its leading edge innovations. It's not that they wouldn't do any updating of on-premises products, but they wouldn't put the AI, I guess maybe the blockchains in there, probably some of the IoT, the Internet of Things features that they've been talking about for years, that would only go in S/4HANA Cloud. And people were outraged. I mean, they literally sounded and expressed a sense of betrayal, because many of these users were companies that had made the move to S/4HANA on premises. So this comment about innovation only happening in the cloud, it really affected companies that had already gone along with SAP earlier, back when S/4HANA itself was first introduced, as we said, 9 years ago, and been among the earlier adopters. So they feel, there's another word for it. There's more than one word for it, but let's just stick with betrayed.
Right.
Yeah, and those
It is.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's interesting you bring that up because that it sort of validates a qualitative feeling I get from SAP customers. I look at our clients, and the reason they reach out to us is because of it's part betrayal, it's part distrust, it's part anxiety, it's part uncertainty. There's just a lot of, I don't think it's a good long-term play for SAP to do what they're doing. It's working. I mean, on one hand, it's working. You're getting customers to do what you want, maybe not at the pace you want, but you're getting them to convert to S4HANA. And eventually you want to get them to S4HANA multi-tenant cloud. That's the ideal utopia, I would assume, for SAP. But in the meantime, it is working. But in the meantime, how much damage is it causing their brand, and just the trust that you would expect to see? I've never seen a distrust at this level in my 25 years. And there's always been a healthy level of distrust in the industry to begin with, but it's pretty high right now, in my opinion. I don't know if you see that as well.
Yeah, I have. And I think it's worse than ever. And you can't blame people. There is a sense, it's not a monopoly situation, but companies feel somewhat locked in. The lock-in was supposed to go away, I think, years ago, but in reality, I think with all the investments they've made, especially if they've heavily customized on-premises ERP, they feel a bit locked in, and so I think they feel probably a little pushed around. I don't know how much time we have for this, Eric, but there's one kind of clue, I think, into how SAP is gradually recognizing that they have to soften their stance here. Just last month, they introduced RISE with SAP Migration and Modernization Program. And that's essentially a deal sweetener that lets the on-premises ECC and S4HANA owners get a one-time upfront credit. Now, they have to, of up to half of their existing contract value. I think it's the maintenance contract, essentially. So they have to commit to RISE with SAP. So they have to say that they're going to make the move. And also SAP at the same time said they would give customers who need more time to migrate, they would extend their existing maintenance by 2 years. And they said that, that was starting in early 2024. So we're talking about extend your maintenance up until early 2026. Sounds suspiciously like it's getting really close to the next year, 2027. So I know it does seem like it's a deal sweetener. I know Holger Mueller at Constellation Research, he had a similar take on it. So I wouldn't say it indicates desperation, because in many ways it does seem like SAP's in the driver's seat here. But
yeah. Well, time will tell. How those conversions go. One thing I also worry about in this whole betrayal scenario that you've described, and the distrust and the forced mandate, all that stuff. One thing it's doing too is it's forcing a bunch of companies to go through a migration at roughly the same time. I mean, you've got 3 years until 2027. So presumably in the next 3 years, you're going to see a burst of activity of companies trying to move off ECC or R3 onto S4HANA. And how is SAP going to support that? How is the ecosystem going to support it? Are we going to be able to find skilled resources that know S4HANA really well and can support our project effectively? I think there's a lot of fallout that we'll see in the next 3 years as a result of that spike in demand and the inability to service all that, call it artificial demand, that's being created by SAP.
And if people want to do it, they're going to pay through the nose, because part of the big part of the mechanism SAP is offering is the big system integrator companies, especially if it's a large implementation through the RISE program.
Yeah. And one thing we'll talk about, and we have a guest in a future episode from Rimini Street, which is a third-party SAP maintenance provider, is really just talking through, what options do you have if you feel like you're at risk of not hitting that 2027 deadline. It's not the end of the world. SAP will try to convince you it's the end of the world, but what do you do? And there's other options you can pursue. There's alternatives, pros and cons, of course, to those alternatives, but it's important to understand all those. So that's something we're going to cover in a future episode in more detail. But do you see, have you seen any evidence of customers that are looking for ways to extend that support past 2027? Or are we still too early to where customers are just still trying to figure out what to do, when to do it, all that good stuff?
I think it's probably a little too early. I haven't heard anyone, and again, this is really anecdotal, saying, oh no, we're going to do this in 2028, 2030. They haven't been talking that far ahead, but there definitely seems to be interest and demand for, and like you mentioned, Rimini Street and there's Spinnaker support, probably a few others that I'm not less aware of, but that can help companies extend the life of their on-premises, and the all the growth and the explosion really of integration tools and different cloud options, and the growth of so-called composable ERP, where you piece things together, which is what SAP is trying to get people and kind of really almost requiring people to do with their ECC and then with S4HANA Cloud and the different varieties of S4HANA. Well, you can do that also with another brand, or you can do it with your on-premises. You can do it with your on-premises business suite, and you can have companies like Spinnaker and Rimini Street helping you do it. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So just to put a bow on all this and sort of wrap it all together, everything you've talked about so far, David, what are some of the biggest recommendations you have for SAP customers that are moving to S4HANA? Either they're thinking about it, they're about to get started, maybe they're just early in the process. What are some of the big takeaways you'd leave the audience here with?
Well, my top thought is, and this may be wishful thinking, but try to hold SAP's feet to the fire. I think perhaps customers might feel like, again, they are not in the driver's seat, but SAP does still need their business. And they are, I would say, more than in, let's say, 10 years ago, at threat of losing business to even smaller companies, but especially the big competitors like Microsoft and Oracle and Infor. So I would say, don't be shy about pushing back, and especially ask about the cloud deployment options and the different versions of S4HANA. I think there's still a lot of confusion there, and some of that I think is promulgated, especially by SAP marketing, where they just try to put cloud on everything and make it sound wonderful, when in many cases you are doing a lift and shift. And some of the cloud offerings that they're talking about are really cloud infrastructure offerings, and so it's just a complicated thing. So I would say, really, really ask a lot of hard questions and push SAP to explain your migration path, and the different options, some of the more affordable options, such as extending existing products that you have through integrations and these extensions, just through like the business technology platform. And you mentioned the third-party support providers like Rimini Street and Spinnaker. They can help you do a lot of these partial moves and get some of the leading edge technologies like AI without fully dropping your on-premises. And so I guess that would be my advice is to really push and ask for some real answers from SAP.
Yeah, and I might add to that list too. Just know what you're getting and what you're not getting. You mentioned, be sure you understand, are you really getting a cloud solution? Is it multi-tenant cloud? Is it private cloud? Is it on premises? There's a lot of different variables to factor in just to know exactly what you're getting. And then, the other thing we see too is that a lot of ECC customers in particular that are used to the maturity and the well-developed solution that ECC has become in the last couple decades, they don't realize that despite all the advancements that S4HANA is making in AI and machine learning and Internet of Things and the HANA platform obviously is a whole game changer for SAP. So there's some definite upside improvements that S4HANA has made in the product, but there's also some things that are just missing. Things that ECC could do, especially in, call it, complex manufacturing environments or a really diversified organization where they just haven't had time in the R&D dollars yet. Despite 9 years in, we're not 30 years in or 20 years in like some of these other legacy products. So they're still maturing the product in some ways. So you do want to know what you're not getting and where the gaps are, just so you can, if anything, know how to manage that risk and know if you're gonna customize S4HANA, or you're gonna put a bolt on in place, you're just gonna do a workaround, because that'll materially affect your implementation timeline and cost. So that'd be the one thing I add too, is just do sort of a fit gap analysis to really understand what you are and aren't getting and versus what your needs are for S4HANA.
Yeah.
So
good advice.
Well, good. Well, I appreciate you being here today, David. Great conversation. And this is super helpful. You've got a unique perspective having covered the S4HANA space for some years now, but also just the SAP ecosystem for even longer. So I really appreciate your insights here.
Well, thanks for having me on, Eric. It's always fun to chat.
So the great stuff there that we discussed with David, and there's more we want to dive into, just some follow-up questions and topics we're going to discuss based on that interview. First, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with more Journey to S4HANA. If you're going through an S4HANA implementation, you're looking for best practices and tips on how to make your project more successful, I encourage you to check out 2 resources that I made available to our listeners here on this podcast. First is our guide to a successful S4HANA implementation. It's a paper that I wrote based on all of our clients that have implemented S4HANA, some of the lessons we've learned, and some of the best practices that we typically advise our clients to follow when going through their S4HANA implementation. So be sure to check that out. You can find that in the links below in this podcast. You can also scan the QR code right in front of you. The second thing you might want to check out is an online course that I've created. It's a course that's called the Deep Dive into SAP S4HANA Implementations. And in that 2.5-hour course, I get into all the basics of what SAP S4HANA is, what it takes to make the project more successful, how to manage change, how to handle the project planning, how to manage your system integrator, as well as some case studies from some of our clients and some of the lessons learned from some of our clients. So check out that training as well. So there's 2 things you could check out here, both in the links below. One is the guide to S4HANA implementations. The other is my S4HANA training course. So be sure to check it out. And our goal here is to help you be more successful in your transformation. So I hope you found this information useful, and we'll continue on with the show.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
Welcome back to Journey to S4HANA podcast, episode number 1. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Fiakuski. I work for Third Stage Consulting, which is an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their S4HANA and digital transformation initiatives. You can learn more about Third Stage at thirdstage-consulting.com. And the show is produced by Major Tom Productions. And if you'd like to feature your product or service in this podcast, be sure to reach out to Mindy from our Major Tom Productions team. I've included her contact information below. So, Darian, we just had David Essex on the show. Great guy, very knowledgeable guy, covers the space very well, in my opinion, and pretty objectively. What were your thoughts and takeaways and questions from that interview?
Yeah, I totally agree. I thought it was a really great conversation, and I hope that the listeners thought so too and gained some good insight. I think there were some really good points made about what the keys are to success with S4HANA. But one question I got from that conversation was, with all the confusion surrounding SAP's migration programs like RISE and SAP Grow, what is their effectiveness in easing the migration process, or how can they do that?
Well, it's a good question. Unfortunately for SAP, I don't know that there's a lot they can do, not because the product is not implementable or because there's some flaw with S4HANA necessarily, but because by definition, S4HANA customers especially are complex, large organizations that are just going to take time and they're going to face risk when they go through their transformations. I know SAP is trying to make S4HANA more palatable and enticing to a lot of people. So they're introducing Grow and Rise and some of these other programs, but it's a lot of the same repurposing or marketing message that they've used in the past. You know, they've always, the SAP and other ERP vendors for that matter, have tried really hard to create sort of a prepackaged mentality, a lift and shift feel to, hey, this isn't as bad as it sounds. You're just moving to another SAP product. We've got industry pre-configured best practices built in. We've got an easy way for you to move to the cloud. And from a technical perspective, they're right. It does help speed some things up from a pure technology deployment or a technology migration perspective. The problem, though, is you're not just migrating technology. You're migrating an entire new way of operating your business. And that's the part that takes a lot of time and money. And that's where you face the most risk. So kudos to SAP for trying, but I just don't know that there's a whole lot they can do just based on history and the realities of S4HANA implementations. It's just going to be, hate to say it, but it's going to be a painful process. But if you have realistic expectations and the right risk mitigation in place, you'll be able to manage through it and be successful.
Yeah, definitely. And I know you mentioned that the reluctance to changing how your business operates is definitely probably one of the main reasons companies don't want to make this transition. But besides that, what are some other maybe complications that will come up to companies that they will not want to transfer over to the cloud or Rise or S4HANA or anything?
Well, I think in general, change is hard. And, so in general, there's going to be some resistance or inertia that organizations and the individuals in the organizations have to overcome. So that's part of it. But I'd say probably the bigger part of it is that, especially, and I'm speaking more to the existing legacy SAP customers here, the ones that are using ECC or R3, chances are pretty high they had a lot of custom features or custom development that they've done for their deployments, and untangling that customization and moving it over to S4HANA is something that's very difficult. And it's going to leave a lot of customers disappointed, for better or for worse. It doesn't necessarily mean they're right to be disappointed, but they're going to be disappointed that they don't get that same functionality that they built custom software for. They're just not going to get that in S4HANA, most likely. So I think that's probably the biggest barrier, combined with the fact that people just don't like to change in general.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Thank you for answering those questions today. And audience, I hope you guys learned some things today too about how to be successful with S4HANA. So I'm going to hand it over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that, Darian. And I'd love to hear from the audience too. What do you think of the Rise and Grow programs? Is it helpful? Is it a way to make SAP implementations easier? If you're an existing customer or if you're part of the SAP ecosystem, I'd love to hear your feedback. Just drop them in the comments here, wherever you're listening or watching to the podcast. So great episode. Thank you, Darian, for co-hosting with us, and David Essex for being here on the show today. We've got a great slate of guests coming up this season on Journey to S4HANA, our debut season, I should say. Next week, we're going to have Dave Beldick, who's a senior manager on the Third Stage Consulting team, very well-versed in S4HANA implementations. He's going to be on the show next week in episode number 2, talking about keys to S4HANA success. We're going to have later in the season, just to give you a quick preview, we're going to have experts on the show talking about lessons from SAP implementations. We'll talk about lessons from a failure, actually a canceled SAP project. We'll talk about why the project was put on hold and what some of the lessons are from that. We'll talk more about Rise and Grow. We'll talk about AI and innovation. We'll bring on an attorney to talk about some of the legalities and T's and C's of S4HANA implementations. We'll talk about change management in one of the episodes. So there's a lot we're going to cover in this podcast. And this podcast is really meant to help project teams and organizations that are either considering an S4HANA implementation or in the midst of an S4HANA implementation. And our hope here is that we paint a realistic and objective view of what to expect and give you some good tips along the way. So be sure to watch this episode. Thanks for watching this episode. Be sure to watch this podcast and future episodes. We will release all 12 episodes week by week here in the first season. So thank you for being here. We'll see you next week on Journey to S4HANA. As always, check out Journey to S4HANA.com for future episodes. Be sure to check out Third Stage Consulting for more tech agnostic resources related to SAP, and be sure to reach out to Mindy at Major Tom Productions if you're interested in sponsoring or partnering with us on this or future episodes of this show. So thank you for being here. I hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next week on Journey to S4HANA.